So now, Mr. Garamendi, if you're all set, we're looking forward to your comments.
Daryl, thank you so very much. It's a great privilege and honor to be with you and to be working with you on arms control issues. For all of you that are there in the audience today, sorry I couldn't be with you, but this Zoom video seemed to be modern, at least one of the more modern ways of communicating. I want to thank all of you for your efforts and for joining in this critical dialogue. In these unsettled times, events like this are really important because they provide a forum for honest discussion and for an opportunity to cut through the rhetoric of fear and doomsday that all too often pervades and occupies the nuclear policy discussion. Unfortunately, dispassionate, calm voices are regularly drowned out by the loudest and the most fearful voices. Last year, at this event, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan outlined 3 goals: prevent an arms race, reduce the risk of misperception and escalation, and ensure the safety and security of people from nuclear threats. He emphasized that an effective deterrence means that we have a better approach, not a more approach. Well, these are fine principles, but I'm concerned that in practice, we're moving towards more, not better. Instead of developing cost-effective systems that provide security while diffusing tensions, we've fallen into the fallacy that more missiles make us more secure. Nothing could be further from the truth. Well, it's well past time for voices, the voices of restraint and risk reduction, to be heard in the nuclear arms debate. The United States, the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China are now locked into an extraordinarily dangerous nuclear arms race. All 3 countries are rapidly increasing their nuclear firepower with new and more bombs, more long-range missiles, new stealth delivery systems, bombers, submarines, and all of this is totally dependent on the newest field of warfare, space. Yes, Star Wars is here today. All 3 countries depend upon their space assets to observe, detect threats, and communicate commands to act. Today, we must call out the failures of our current approach to nuclear modernization and demand that we treat arms control and de-escalation with the same dedication and focus that we give to our nuclear weapons development. It's long, long past time to develop a strategy that sets priorities, recognizes limitations, and strives for a safer future. Before I dive into the specifics of how Congress is approaching our nuclear weapons systems, I think it's important to step back and consider this in a broader context. Since their development 80 years ago, the destructive capabilities of nuclear weapons have terrified and shocked, but also led governments to pursue their own arsenals and develop the capacity to destroy our civilizations multiple times over. Governments justified the expanding stockpiles with convoluted theories of nuclear deterrence that all too often defied common sense. It wasn't until the arms control programs and treaties that were established that Russia and the United States de-escalated the spiral of stockpile bombs. For 4 decades, progress was made, and the number of deployed and existing nuclear bombs were reduced. And even the most adversarial countries agreed that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Yet despite this understanding, we continue to maintain and modernize our arsenals with the belief that these weapons will dissuade others from employing theirs. The threat of nuclear conflict remains, and with it, life on our planet ending and becoming dramatically changed. It just occurred to me that it might be useful for meetings such as this to remind people of the arms control agreements and the leaders that negotiated them. I'm sure that some of my nuclear saber-rattling buddies in Congress would be surprised to find that their most ardent nuclear security heroes actually negotiated reductions and controls. Now, I recognize the nuclear threats posed by countries like North Korea, Russia, and China. I don't deny the challenging security environment that we face today. I am fully aware of the Taiwan-China threat, as well as China's military buildup and the South China Sea expansion. The North Korean regime is dangerous and could precipitate a conflict at any moment. I condemn Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and its irresponsible nuclear saber-rattling and very dangerous nuclear exercises. Now, despite these serious threats, we must be wise in preparing our defense and response. Aggression should not be our first thought when we are faced with threats, uncertainty, and misunderstandings. Therefore, I strongly support efforts by the U.S. and Chinese governments to engage in meaningful dialogue that results in specific, concrete actions to reduce the risk of miscommunication or escalation. As we navigate these complex geopolitical landscapes, it's imperative that we pause and reflect on the strategies guiding our nuclear policy. Strategies must be more than a word thrown on top of some grandiose statement. True strategy is making the hard choices to align our country's limited resources with our unlimited aspirations. The greatest problem facing our nuclear strategy today is that we fail to realistically consider that balance and revisit our assumptions, adjust courses when programs fail, and figure out new paths going forward. Once approved, our weapon programs persist, even when they nearly double or triple in their budget. No one seems to say enough. Now, too often, we allow these debates to be driven by military calculations and experts who think they know how to fight a nuclear war. But we must not forget that in a democratic society, the military is the extension of the political and not the other way around. When it comes to programs and strategies that threaten our very existence, we as a whole society must decide what costs we should bear and what risks we must take. Our nuclear strategy must be balanced and rational, allowing for deterrence and defensive actions while encouraging collaboration for a more peaceful future. Now, we in Congress are very much a part of the problem. We have bought into the assumption that more nuclear weapons will make us safer. The ever-growing costs reflect the irrationality that has plagued our nuclear policy. In the name of modernization, we have taken on hundreds of billions of dollars of additional spending, and the nuclear counts grow without question or scrutiny. Let's consider for a moment the nuclear modernization efforts. The political price tag for the New START was to modernize all three legs of America's nuclear triad. Proponents told us that the multi-billion-dollar cost was absolutely necessary to assure that we would continue to have a viable deterrent, even though we would have fewer weapons. Now, we must fully understand the reasons for the massive growth and the cost of all these programs. If we were to turn to the new Sentinel ICBM, which is destined to replace the Minuteman III, it has incurred an egregious 37% cost overrun, making the program's costs almost 211% higher than the Air Force's initial 2015 estimate. This has triggered a critical non-McCurdy cost overrun, forcing a stop and a full statutory review. Despite the new estimated cost of of over $130 billion in the next decade or so, there are loud and clear reflexive signals that the Pentagon and Congress intend to plow ahead, no matter what the cost or the necessity. We hear always, well, we'll do whatever is necessary. No, wait, just a moment. What about the law? What about the non-McCurdy law? Does the brass in the Pentagon and the leaders in Congress know that the law requires a complete and full review that address 5 critical steps? 1, is the program essential to national security? 2, are there no alternatives to the program which will provide the acceptable capability? 3, the new cost estimates have been determined to be reasonable. 4, the program is a higher priority than other programs whose funding will have to be reduced to cover the increased cost of the Sentinel. And 5, is the management structure is sufficient to control additional costs? Mr. Secretary Austin, you have to judge each of these 5 and then report to Congress about your decision. Now, it's not just the Pentagon's responsibility to conduct a thorough examination to assess the necessity and the feasibility. It is also Congress's responsibility to engage in a full debate to assess the Pentagon's rationale. Without public pressure, it's doubtful that any hearings will occur. And that's why our Congressional Nuclear Weapons and Arms Control Working Group will hold its own hearing on July 14th, and we invite all of you to join us at that hearing. Now, for years, Congress has dictated in the annual NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, that the U.S. maintain a minimum of 400 ICBMs. Why? Well, the answer seems to be, well, that's the number we've always had. Well, the number of ground-based ICBMs should not be set by the number of the existing concrete silos, but rather in an honest analysis of nuclear strategy. Such a review must consider the risks of a catastrophic mistake that is inherent in the Sentinel program. In the event of an attack, it is assumed that the first target is the well-known locations of the ICBMs, and therefore we find a use it or lose it situation, and the very dangerous launch on warning program. That is the operational imperative of the ICBM system. The President will have only a few months to decide if the attack is real or if the alert is false. And the button would have to be pushed within 15 minutes or less. Now, if the nuclear program is for deterrence, then the submarines, the airplanes, and their missiles offer sufficient firepower to dissuade any adversary. These systems have the benefit of stealth, and more importantly, the President has the time to gather all the information and then decide to use the nuclear response. Now, if that weren't enough, we also have ample conventional weapons capable to deter potential adversaries. However, the Sentinel program is not the only problem. The hidden costs of the ground-based ICBM Sentinel modernization are found in unexpected and little noticed places, like the Energy and Water Appropriation Bill. Now, did you know that it appropriates $19.8 billion this coming year for weapons activities? That's a $2.7 billion increase from the previous year. So what's the $20 billion for? This year, the Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Agency, NNSA, requested nearly a $3 billion down payment for modernization of the nuclear plutonium pit program. Now, these are the hollow plutonium shells that are used to trigger the nuclear reaction. On its own, this number is astonishingly high, but it doesn't even include the $8 billion to build the production facility at Los Alamos Laboratories. And the second facility at Savannah River, which alone has a projected total project cost of somewhere between $18 and $25 billion. That's a six-fold increase from the initial planned construction. That will, if ever built, be the most expensive building in America. And oh, there's more. There's $1.4 billion requested for the stockpile sustainment and $1.1 billion for a new Sentinel warhead to be developed at Lawrence Laboratory. Now that also has grown by 63%. And there are another untold costs associated with 6 other warhead and bombs that support the other nuclear modernization programs. Even proponents of modernizing nuclear programs should be concerned about these high costs. In January of 2023, the GAO report found that NASA has not, NNSA has not developed a comprehensive schedule of costs and has not identified all of the activities necessary or the milestones to achieve the required 80 bit per year production capacity. Now, did anybody ask, why do we need to produce 80 bits per year when America already has over 4,000 plutonium pits in storage? Has anyone studied the potential of repurposing those pits for new bombs? The bottom line is this. Senior officials at NNSA admit that they won't meet deadlines and they have no idea what the ultimate cost will be. Now, I proposed a simple, straightforward amendment that would change this law that requires 80 bits per year to a lower number that represents the realistic number of plutonium pits our country actually needs and can feasibly produce. To some of my colleagues, this seemed as an extreme, radical position, and my proposal was voted down. It's too bad that the Net McCurdy law does not apply to the Department of Energy. Although I have included in this year's NDAA a requirement that the GAO review the feasibility of applying the Net McCurdy law to the DOE and also reviewing the analysis done by the Department of Defense. Hopefully, it'll add more impetus for the department to do an honest and thorough analysis. Now, across the nuclear enterprise, costs are soaring, fears are growing, and it remains unclear what goals we're actually achieving. Amidst these soaring costs and escalating risks, it's imperative to reassess our nuclear priorities. Investing more of the modernization budget into diplomacy, into arms control, and into education could yield far-reaching benefits, fostering a stronger and more secure nation and world. Now, Congress must fulfill its duty to allocate taxpayer funds responsibly, avoiding excess expenses on wasteful nuclear programs, and do wasteful nuclear programs that do little to enhance genuine security. Now, maintaining a safe, secure, and effective deterrent does not necessitate all of these costly modernization plans, especially given the pressing needs in other critical areas to strengthen our nation and create world stability. The significance of arms control cannot be overstated. Prioritizing de-escalation isn't just an idealistic notion, it's a necessity. Arms races cannot be won. When we attempt to outpace our adversaries in weapon development, they inevitably respond in kind, draining their and our limited resources and fostering international instability as fear predominates and the world's most devastating weapons become a more likely option. The critical role of arms control in preserving global stability and security is evident from history's many, many close calls. We can't wait for another Cuban Missile Crisis to recognize the danger of miscommunication and failure to engage in a dialogue. Now, I know that many of you in this room have spent years drawing attention to the importance of arms control, and I am so grateful for your efforts. Like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill, I know that this is often a thankless work. Fighting and clawing for progress, only to see it roll back with the next administration. But the work you do cannot be more important. And unlike the Greek myth, I do believe that we can get that boulder to the top of the hill and develop a robust arms control regime that will help all of us avoid an existential threat. Now, there are three key pillars to this endeavor. First, sharing knowledge and fostering understanding are of paramount importance. There are some of you in this room that have written compelling arguments calling public attention to the danger of weapons. Thank you for doing so, and continue. Secondly, encouraging the dialogue and fostering open communications channels are essential. This meeting is one such example. The recent dialogues with China's political and military leaders is encouraging, and we should accept China's offer to discuss a no first use policy. We don't know where that discussion will lead, but it's an opening, and we would be foolish not to take advantage of that opening and follow it wherever it might lead. Lastly, garnering political support is crucial. Nonprofits and advocacy groups, you've laid the groundwork, and now we must amplify your efforts and call on Congress to act. For too long, our focus on arms control has waned, and members of Congress have paid too little focus and attention to it. Now this is the moment to redouble our efforts. In a world marked by uncertainty and growing competition, it's time for bridge building, time for fostering understanding. It's more critical now than ever before. However, this effort will start here at home. Inevitably, we must reconcile our own infinite desires with our limited means. And that means making hard decisions about how and where we spend the taxpayer dollars. Can we make hard decisions? I believe we can, and I know we must. Billions of dollars have been spent in the last decade on weapons programs instead of finding paths to peace. It's well past the moment when we say enough. Now together, we must confront the challenges before us, not by building ever more dangerous weapons, but by placing the same priority on effective arms control and risk reduction measures that we currently place on the nuclear modernization. We may face many challenges, but we still have the choice on which future we will pursue. We know the risks, we know the dangers that modernization and the inevitable arms race will hold. But that's why it's even more important that we redouble our efforts towards making de-escalation real. Let's take this moment, this opportunity, to engage in a meaningful dialogue and choose the path towards a safer and more secure world. Thank you for all of your efforts. I'm delighted to be able to join with you.